Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I think we have a lot of different time zones involved with this session today, so I wanted to welcome everybody. My name is Doug Jury. I'm going to be leading the session today, and I'll introduce my partner, Blake, here in just a moment. So everybody find their virtual seat, grab an iced tea, grab another cup of coffee, depending on what time zone you're in, and we will be right back with you at the top of the hour. So again, thank you so much for joining. We've got a very exciting webinar here for you today, how we're gonna basically look at the 5 hidden threats from a security perspective, and we're gonna weave that into infrastructure as a service. First time ever done on a webinar. So hang tight, we'll be right back with you. All right, folks, I think we have 1 more minute to go. We're going to let people trickle into the virtual classroom here in just another more minute, 1 more minute, and then we'll get ready to go in the interest of making sure that we kick this off on time. This will be a recorded session, so you'll be able to listen back to this recording as well. You may also use the question box, and you can type in some questions along the way if you wish, and that would be wonderful as well. So again, Doug Jury here, going to be your flight attendant today, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So looks like we just hit the top of the hour in pretty much all the time zones, of course. So let's go ahead and get started. This is Zadara Edge Cloud Services, 5 hidden threats that put your data at risk, sponsored by Arco Group and also Zadara. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Blake Longren. Blake, you want to say hello to the folks?
Hello, folks. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome. Vice President of Business Development for the Arco Group, and I am Doug Jury, the Vice President of Partner Marketing here at Zadara. So what we have in store for you today is we're going to talk a little bit about Arco and Zadara. It's not really a whole lot of wasted time on the introduction here. The real meat of this is what we want to really focus on is those 5 hidden threats putting your data at risk. But we're also going to weave this in cleverly through the infrastructure of what you have as an opportunity to put in using the Zadara Edge Cloud solutions and things like that. Then we'll have some closing thoughts, and of course, like I said, you could do the Q&A along the way. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blake, and I'm going to let him talk about his company, the Arco Group.
Sure thing. We'll go through this here quickly, and as you said, we'll get to the meat of things about these 5 hidden threats and how infrastructure as a service is a bottom line solution to all. But first, I do see a lot of familiar faces. I want to thank everyone for your support, and thank you for joining us today. I know it's not always easy to find time on your calendar. So for those of you who I do know, please bear with me for a moment. I just want to take some time and introduce the Arco Group. I do get the question a lot where people will say, I saw your logo at March Madness, or I've seen your logo at a sporting event, but admittedly, not really sure what you do. And the reason the logo can be recognizable is we have been around since 1985, headquartered in Jacksonville, Florida, but we do operate in 34 different states and now 7 different countries, leveraging over 1,000 technicians with a myriad of certifications that can scale to temporary project help, or that can just completely take over the IT needs of a client, which can range from a small to medium-sized business. We have clients that have a handful of employees that are a law office or an engineering firm, up to publicly traded corporations that are household names, including companies that are in the Department of Defense supply logistics chain, which can be very, very important as far as having an extension to make sure that they are in compliance and that they're keeping up with things like FedRAMP. And as projects come about to keep up with those sorts of compliance, they're often utilizing some of those 1,000 technicians as an extension of their IT department, or just simply to provide coverage with something that might be out of normal hours for their own IT employees so that they can live a little bit more comfortably. And then for the smaller end of the spectrum, we also provide complete virtual CIO support where we can help you plan the future of those projects, the timing, look at ROI of new technology, see what might make sense and what might not. So more specifically, the most popular products or services that people come to the Arco Group for are, as I had just outlined, our NOC, our Network Operating Center. But we also, on the other end, have Arco Adapt Complete Digital Workspace, which is where, for a couple of $100 per person, we do all of your IT, including all of your hardware, your networking gear, your laptops, everything that every employee needs. If you have a small up-and-coming business or you just don't want to worry about having an IT department at all, Complete Digital Workspace is your solution. And then for complimentary help desk, ours runs 24/7, 365. Maybe you just need some help on weekends, evenings, and holidays. As I had mentioned, as we are helping so many companies become FedRAMP compliant or with their NIST compliance, a big part of that is cybersecurity. Unfortunately, one of Arco's most popular services that we've had a lot of conversations about in the last couple of years, and we'll talk a little bit more about why later in this hour, is ransomware and cybersecurity. And in fact, we do have a solution that offers a $1 million guarantee or warranty against your getting ransomware, which also, as I had mentioned, includes making sure that you're in compliance, but that can also mean us going in, testing, penetration testing, doing the consulting that you need to show your client that they can keep sending you those sales orders because you do fall into whatever compliance they've sent you a formal letter to make sure that you need to formally resolve. Backup and disaster recovery and the Arco Cloud, which we're going to talk about here a little bit more just now. And speaking of the Arco Cloud, it's made up of 43 different data centers based in the US. And very quickly, I think what's most notable about this, as opposed to a public cloud, we can tell you exactly where your data really is. And that could include, if necessary, a couple of data centers within this fleet that are used by Homeland Security. They are some of the best data centers in the world. If you've ever been on a boring data center tour, I would invite you to reach out and schedule a tour of our data center that's 200 feet underground, has its own aquifer, its own underground lake for water and for cooling, and it is not a boring tour of a data center. And that is part of the Zadara Edge network of data centers.
Perfect. Thank you, Blake. That was what a great overview of that. And I've not been on that tour, so you're holding out on me. So we'll I'll definitely schedule that. So a little bit about Zadara. I like to really talk a little bit about Zadara from a map perspective. When I started with Zadara, when we started back in 2011, this map was kind of boring. It had one little flag out here on the East Coast. And now we've basically, after 10 years, we're now up to 300 plus clouds. Many of those are Arco. We have 280 plus petabytes deployed across the country, and we're working across a little over 250 partners today. So the evolution of Zadara over the last 10 years has been amazing. We're going to talk a little bit about a lot of our solutions as well, but the edge solutions I always love to talk about a little bit. This little flag down here in the Peruvian mountains is an edge solution, of course. They have their compute and their storage down there. We also have one up in Flin Flon, Canada, which is also kind of an edge solution. So if we look at a lot of the different solutions out there, there's a lot of edge out here that maybe is something that you're very, very interested in. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of setting the table for what Blake is going to talk about here in just a moment. And the setting of the table is simply that Zadara was a product. Basically, there was a business model created, and then the product was designed. And so what I mean by that is that we said, how are we going to bring this product to market? How are we going to do this? And how are we going to fit these pieces together? So the first thing we need to do is enterprise grade performance and security. We needed to have sort of table stakes says that we need to be able to have a RAID solution and a compute as a service solution that will stand toe to toe with pretty much anybody else out there. So it has SSDs and hard drives. We're going to talk about this whole concept over here. If we go over to the middle piece here, this kind of fully elastic piece, what that means is that inside the product, we had to build in the concept of cloud and colo and on-prem. We had to basically look scale up, scale down, pay as you go, all these different things we had to be able to do. We had to be able to do hardware upgrades and make this all an OpEx model. So that was basically part of what we wanted to accomplish in the product, but we first had to define this business model. And then off to the right, we needed to design into this expert management, this ability to be proactive support. Now, everybody knows about reactionary support. If something happens, what do you do? But proactive says, let's have this product complain when it hurts here, or when it needs more storage there, or it needs to basically change the spindle types or whatever. Let's have it talk to us and let's do this. So if I take the enterprise grade performance, the agility and the infinite resources as an OpEx model, and I take the management built into it, we now have a business model that basically inside the product itself is the genetics that basically creates what we're talking about here today. So these are some of the companies that we've been able to bring to the party here. And if you look at it, there's a lot of companies that vetted this solution in a very big manner, the way you folks would as well. So with that, I'm going to share some stories as we move forward on some of these customers here. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Blake.
Thank you, Doug. I don't know how I hadn't noticed Great Wolf Resorts on that list before. We're going to have to talk later. My family loves that place. So let's get...
It's a ball. It's a ball. The water slides are amazing.
Yes, that's what I understand. All right, 5 hidden threats. Let's go ahead and dive in here. So threat number 1, backdoor vulnerabilities. So I know some of you are looking at this and you're thinking, okay, this is not a hidden threat, Blake. What are we talking about here? This is, zero-day viruses have been around for decades. So bear with me and let me explain. And yes, that's absolutely true. The first virus was, I think, the mid-'80s, whenever John McAfee invented a way to thwart and started a small company called McAfee Antivirus. And really what a zero-day virus is, for those of you who don't know, it's when somebody finds a hole in the coding for software that's popularly used, like Microsoft Office as an example. And it's called a zero-day virus because it's when they find it for the first time. So the first person who finds a specific vulnerability and figures out how to take advantage of that vulnerability in order to insert ransomware or some kind of hack, that is what's known as a zero-day virus. And oftentimes that is why we get those annoying pop-ups on our machines that tell us that our operating system needs to be updated or Microsoft is asking us to patch the machine. And that's why those have become just absolutely imperative, and why I think some people who have been doing patching for quite some time are scratching their heads a little bit thinking, well, that's not really a hidden threat. Everybody knows you need to keep your machines patched. However, what if I told you just last year that in one major study, 41% of enterprise companies, when they were tested, did not have their machines completely patched. Why is that important? Well, number one, it only takes a single weakness, right? It just takes one machine that isn't patched properly to fall victim to a zero-day virus that's on the network, and boom, you've got a problem across your entire network. The reason that this continues to be a problem most commonly is that, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be able to relate to this a bit from both sides, IT departments have really historically been conditioned to be polite and to not be a nuisance and to not interrupt the people doing the quote-unquote real work. And yes, the IT department is absolutely there to support the business for whatever that business's core competency is. But with what we're seeing in trends in ransomware and cybersecurity in the last couple of years especially, IT department and being able to patch machines really needs to take priority over interrupting somebody's day. Now that said, the way that most companies handle that is they're doing their patching at night. And this is what leads me full circle to why I decided to go ahead and include this, and why I am continually talking about this to my clients, is that 41%. There are several causes, but by far the most common cause is users turning down their machines when they leave the office or closing their laptop after dinner every night, and the patching simply not getting through. So that really speaks to making sure that management and IT management are working close together, and also with human resources, because nowadays it is everybody's responsibility. I don't care if you work in accounting, I don't care if you work in human resources, candidly, even if you're on the floor of a manufacturing facility or you're on the floor of a car dealership selling vehicles, Nowadays, it is everybody's responsibility to protect your data. Another way, besides these machines not being patched and zero-day viruses getting through, there is something called DNS, which some of us are familiar with, and that basically is going to a fake web page is the most common example. So there are solutions out there now that will prevent employees from going to known bad web pages or accidentally clicking on a fake web page for their bank. And I can show you examples of some very convincing looking, say, Bank of America login pages just built to capture people's credentials. So it used to be that that kind of DNS monitoring and protection was an additional layer of security, but not anymore. It needs to be part of your base layer of security now. Speaking of the users, 2020, you know, it's not the personal devices as much, it used to be, as what we're dealing with now as an unexpected threat that people really weren't expecting to come up with new management tools for was the mass move to remote work. I mean, we've seen companies like Microsoft early last year move almost 70% of their employees to remote work. And what we found is, at least from Arco's perspective, while we've been helping companies to operate efficiently and to overcome that challenge of shifting to a remote work, there are some innate advantages to that, and there are some returns on investment to moving towards a remote workforce. So I can tell you personally, I know a lot of fairly large organizations that no matter what happens moving forward are going to have a much larger remote workforce than they had in the past. So I think for good or bad, that the makeup of where employees are able to work from in the future is going to permanently change. And that, of course, brings up several concerns with people running around with devices in different locations on different networks, which means more potential vulnerabilities. But I'll tell you, you don't really have to be a hacker to take advantage of remote workers anymore. I'll talk about this a little bit more detail in just a minute, but I'm sure some of you in IT are familiar with a very common device called a pineapple. You don't even need to go to the dark web to buy one anymore. I hate to say it, I'm not letting cat out of the bag because people already know, but you can go on Google and find and purchase pineapples, which is basically a device that allows you to do a middle person attack. And that's when you sit in the parking lot outside of Starbucks with this device called a pineapple that acts as if it's the closest Wi-Fi tower. And it is sending all your internet traffic to and from your device, to and from the local Wi-Fi tower. It's just collecting everything in the middle. So everybody who's working from that Starbucks or who's just working from home and somebody's driving up and down the streets in their neighborhood is unknowingly having all of their data logged by a device that's between them and their local internet connection. Which is why secured encrypted connections are so important. A lot of companies didn't necessarily have that because, again, they weren't planning on having this large remote workforce, but definitely a must change in strategy, a must to sit down and formally change the policies and procedures of how your employees are able to access information. And in fact, you know, infrastructure as a service, not having your employees work on local devices and you know, having the flexibility of them being able to work from anywhere, from any device, but in a secure way, is a huge advantage of infrastructure as a service. Oh, skip one. So again, talking about the users, especially nowadays with so many people working from all over the place, one of the biggest threats to your data, believe it or not, is not something technical. By far, one of the biggest threats to our data is the human element, human error, human tendencies. So as a quick example, I'm sure that all of you are familiar with phishing to some extent and to social engineering, where rather than hackers technically going in and using keyloggers to steal passwords, they use the telephone. And there's some great videos you can find on YouTube, great examples, real life examples of hackers who are experienced in this, just to show you how it's done, calling into a bank, pretending like there's a crying baby in the background and talking their way into getting whatever personal information or details they need to ultimately be able to hack somebody. One of the ways that we help hackers do this through our own human tendencies is through our complacency, or I'll dare say it, I'll use myself as an example. I'm lazy sometimes when I can be. And I used to be very lazy with my passwords. I would use a different password for all of my accounts, but I would only change 1 or 2 characters. So maybe my password was password 1, and then my password for LinkedIn was password 2. Well, some of you may remember in 2015, there was a huge hack on LinkedIn. And what happened is whenever they got your LinkedIn password, if you were like me, which a lot of people were, it was a very simple algorithm to run your LinkedIn password through common variations or similar variations, and very easily and quickly hack any other password, maybe your work password or your banking or credit card password, if it was similar enough. And that is exactly what happened. So we do dark web scans. One of the things that Arco does is we're constantly scanning the dark web, and we will get a notification if anyone tries to sell a stolen password from any of our clients' domains so that we can intervene. Excuse me. And yes, that is done. Yep, you're right. Go ahead. Next slide. You got it. Very intuitive. Thank you, Doug. And that is often, those passwords are then resold on the dark web, which is something everybody loves to talk about. Not everybody on the dark web is sitting in a dark basement with a gray hoodie on. But I think this is a great example. I think this does a really good job of visually representing and explaining the internet overall and the differences between the dark web and what we're used to seeing. So I think people think of the dark web as this sort of lonely place on the internet. It doesn't quite work that way. It was actually created by the Department of Defense. So what really happened is the deep web that you see in the middle, that's what the internet was created for. That is colleges and universities sharing data, governments sharing data, or number crunching, things like that. And then you have the surface web. That's what everybody thinks of as the internet. It's actually probably the smallest part of the internet. That's where you're going to do your banking. That's where you're going to Google information, and that's where you're going to go watch cat videos. The dark web was initially designed by the US Department of Defense as a way for our military and government to be able to communicate better anonymously without having to do all the cryptology that they had done in previous military exercises. So, and in fact, they still use the term cryptologists. There are a lot of leaders in the cybersecurity world or the white hat hacking world, the good guy hackers, who are former Navy and former military cryptologists. But what their expertise really stems from was the Department of Defense creating this way to anonymously communicate, and unfortunately, no good deed goes unpunished. So criminals figured out a way to get a hold of and start to use the dark web so that they could communicate anonymously. And that was a big part of the reason why in 2016, the FBI announced that cybersecurity had at that point in time surpassed all other forms of crime in the world. So for several years now, cybersecurity has already been the most prolific form of crime in the world. Yet for some reason, people are still more worried about locking their houses and locking their cars than they are about protecting their data and protecting their businesses. So a lot of, actually, before we go on, the predictions are that by the end of this year, cybersecurity will be the 3rd largest economy in the world, behind only the United States and China. Right now, the 3rd largest economy by GDP, I think, is Japan. It's something like 5.6 trillion. So we're expected for ransomware and cybersecurity to be over $6 trillion industry by the end of this year. And by 2025, a $10.5 trillion industry, which will make it the 3rd largest economy very easily. And let's go to the next slide, please, Doug. So a lot of the information on the dark web, including the passwords being stolen, are also where you can find, as I had mentioned earlier, some hacking devices like pineapples, but it is also where something called ransomware as a service is bought and sold. So we hear a lot about ransomware, and we hear a lot about ransomware encrypting machines simply by somebody clicking on the wrong link or clicking on the wrong email. But what a lot of people don't realize is that, for example, an attacker can create a social media presence. They can create a complete fake profile on Facebook and LinkedIn. And if they want to target a particular company, they can even go ahead and make a few connections or mutual connections, perhaps with the human resources department at that company. And when that company is hiring, they will go ahead and send in a real resume that, unfortunately, when the human resources manager clicks, it releases ransomware, but not immediately. So it looks like a resume, human resources manager passes it along to whomever's appropriate. They might go ahead and consider that individual who isn't a real person, but in the meantime, what they don't realize has happened is that that email attachment has opened up a second time in the background. Something that companies like SentinelOne figured out how to monitor and prevent. But if you don't have that kind of a solution in place, then that allows the hacker to have freedom to your network. And what we have found is that it's an average of almost 200 days before they actually implement the data breach or they actually implement the attack. And the reason for that is what they're doing during that time is they're figuring out how to squeeze the most money out of that organization. So even something like ransomware as a service, where you can not be a hacker, go to the dark web, buy ransomware on a USB port, not really have any super technical abilities, but you walk into a car dealership pretending to buy a car, manage to plug this USB port into one of the sales representatives' computers in their cubicles, and then you get your share of the ransom. There have been similar cases like that where it was simply used so that somebody could short a company's stock. They just wanted the news to hit that that company had been hacked so that they could short the stock. So again, they're not always just trying to instantly attack. What's a little bit scary is that you may have someone that's in your network now, just sort of monitoring what everybody's doing, trying to figure out how to squeeze the most juice, so to speak. So as an example, I've personally seen a case where the hackers monitored and knew when the CEO was going to be on an international flight so that they could send a wiring request, knowing that nobody would be able to text or call the CEO on his mobile phone. They sent an email from his inbox asking them to wire 6 figures overseas. Luckily, in this particular example, a bank in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, as a matter of fact, a very smart employee saw that something didn't look right, did some double checking, and the bank actually prevented the fraud before it was wired. But the company employees were going to go ahead and wire that money. So again, that's why it's really important to pay attention and make sure that there isn't anybody just kind of hanging out. It's more than just making sure that we don't get hacked. It's also making sure that there's nobody who isn't supposed to be hiding somewhere in the network. I know that a lot of people know how important backups are, but I will say that I am surprised how often I run into situations where people have one backup or they have it backed up on the same network as they have their environment. Word to the wise, don't do that. If you're only going to back up on the same network, well, most new ransomware variants encrypt your backups as well. So if you're constantly backing up on the same network, that allows them to do everything that I just explained, and they can take their time doing it. That is why it is so important. If you've ever heard of the old phrase, 3 is 2, or I'm sorry, 2 is 1 and 1 is none, is another way to say it. But it's absolutely imperative that not only are your backups encrypted themselves, but that they are in at least 2, if not 3 geographically diverse locations. The ultimate fail-safe against ransomware and data loss.
And thank you, Blake. We're gonna talk about this in a hardware abstract. We're gonna talk about this 32110 as we move a little bit forward. But first of all, I wanted to basically introduce a poll question here. So I'm gonna go ahead and start a polling question here. So if you would, please take a look at this. Which of these 5 threats worries you the most? Pick one, pick more than one if applicable. So we're gonna do select one or more of the following. So go ahead and hit the poll. So we have people coming in. I'm looking at the results here. We still have some folks trickling in. And like I said, select all that makes sense to you. Interesting. Interesting. All right, I think I've got this settled out right now. Everybody done? All in? I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. I'm going to share the results. So the results, which of the 5 threats? Looks like encrypted backup and on-premise and remote. That's a good one. That's 60%. Human error, 60%. and then we got some outliers here, cybercrime, remote work, and then back to our vulnerability. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these 5 items, and anybody that's in the background here on my side, if you would go ahead and just mute your phones. I'm getting a little bit of background noise. That would be appreciated. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to hide those results. I'm going to come back up to the session here. So now these 5 threats that Blake articulated, we're going to go ahead and weave through an infrastructure as a service solution. Sometimes you're probably saying to yourself, you're scratching your head and you're going, well, how does hardware and cloud solutions and services help me with my threats? And I'm going to weave that through as simply as I can. So the first thing I like to do is I like to talk about some value add for you folks. What I see by talking to hundreds of customers and hundreds of partners in a given quarter, I basically hear, I listen. I try not to really create new thought. I try to help you by giving the thought that I've spoken with many customers. So here, one of the big things that are going on out there is this notion of repatriation, and basically the concept of moving perhaps away from some of the hyperclouds into more of an edge environment, migrating data between clouds and DCs and colos and all those other things. Moving CapEx to OpEx is basically a huge objective or a huge goal out there for a lot of people. And sometimes I'll ask the question, how many folks have converted over from CapEx to OpEx? And I generally get between 60 and 70% of the folks have moved a fair amount of their workforce over. Needing cloud services closer. I've got a use case for this that I'm going to share with you, but basically moving the infrastructure, the compute and the storage closer to the point of need. Sometimes the hyperclouds are a little bit too far away from what you want to do, but I want to give you the same. Remember, my product was designed with the business model in mind before the product was actually engineered. Utilize Arco Group's co-location sites. They said they had 43, Blake said he had 43 sites out there. There's probably a site out there that we can basically harness for where you want to be. And then we want to keep your infrastructure fresh and new. I don't know how many people have thought about, oh, I got this huge refresh cycle. I basically have to now worry about more CapEx. I've got to cut another PO. I've got to do this and that. It would be really elegant if we could basically simply add the new spindles, the higher capacity drives and things like that on the fly, so you never have to worry about another free refresh or a migration cycle. So that is what I see going on out there in the industry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk now about Arco Edge Cloud Services powered by Zadara. That's really what it is. And it's made up of 3 different components. It's made up of what we call Z Compute, Z Network, and Z Storage. I'm going to talk primarily about Z Compute and Z Storage today. And I'm going to go into much more detail here. But suffice to say, the Z Compute is literally an on-demand, spin up, spin down, whatever you want, whether it be in your data center or in a colo or in an Arco data center, you have the ability to do this. And one of the really cool things about this is we now have the ability to emulate an EC2 or an Amazon instance, if you will, to be able to take all the good work that you've done with the APIs out there as well. So Z Compute, a completely virtual machine, spin up, spin down as you wish. And then Z Storage is the ability to fulfill your block file and object storage on demand again, spin up, spin down, see whatever you want. So we're going to build this story, and we're going to also drop in the 5 threats that we've been talking about to date as we go through the next 30 minutes. So hang with me here. And we've got a great call to action at the end of this session. So I hope you stay with me till the end, only because we really want to give you back some good monthly reoccurring costs associated with this particular package here. So Z Compute, I'll go through this fairly quickly, it's just this self-service compute provisioning. So you don't have to worry about hardware. You don't have to worry about whether you own anything. You're simply going to click a few buttons and you're going to basically spin up, whether it be a Microsoft or Linux or whatever you wish to do. It comes with auto scaling. It'll automatically grow as it needs to. It'll automatically drop as it needs to. It'll add more networking as it needs to. We can basically do whatever we want. So this icon over here, this Z Compute virtual machines here, I want you to remember that icon for just a moment. And I want you to also be reminded that this isn't just the hypercloud that I'm talking about here. I'm talking about your data center. I'm talking about a co-location. I'm talking about perhaps even a public cloud like Arco Group, okay? So we can basically do it that way. So let's get started We're going to basically just simply go to a simple URL. You're going to register for an account. You're going to click on the site you want. In this case, I'm just using Arco site number 1. You're going to click a couple of things and you're going to create this virtual machine that's ready to run whatever application you want, a SharePoint, an Exchange, a SQL database, an Oracle database, whatever you want. Now, why is this associated to threat 1 and threat number 4? Backdoor vulnerabilities. Basically, nobody can hack in. We've done penetration testing. We've done all these things. So we are taking care of the security risk for this hardware on your behalf. We're doing this basically off your balance sheet, and we're taking care of a lot of the security risks here for them. Number 4, the cybercrime, and also the deep web, or the dark web. All this, the logins, the passwords, all of these things are encrypted. They all have the logins and the passwords that you weren't. So again, this entire environment is locked down from a security perspective. We have to be as good, if not better, than any of the data centers that are out there today, because we basically are running this on your behalf. So we've really looked at all the things that Blake talked about, especially in this case, threat 1 and 4. So if I hit the go button here, I now have virtual machines. Now, where do I have them? I can have them in an Arco MSP. I can have them in an Arco colocation facility, or I can have it in your on-prem. Now, once I have this up and running, I can sort of create a hybrid environment here as well. Now, I'm not going to talk about the hyper clouds today or right now until I get into the storage piece, because they really don't mean anything. It's either going to be you're going to run an Amazon, an Azure, or a Google compute service, or you're going to use one from the Zadara Edge Cloud. So it's going to be one or the other. That doesn't necessarily mean that's true when we talk to the storage. So hang with me, and we're going to develop this picture. But what you want to leave behind on this is on-demand virtual machines. Spin them up, spin them down, only pay for the cores that you use. Basically, we track it by the hour, so we know exactly what you're consuming, and you're going to right size exactly what you need wherever you need it to be. The Z storage part, again, designed for your needs in mind. We know that people aren't ready to just go with all SSDs. It's been tried. We want to basically have hard drives and caching, like a hybrid environment, and maybe a solid state disk. We want our object storage to be a lot less expensive than our high performance Oracle and SQL databases. Why would you charge the same for those 2 different use groups? It would be silly. So we basically designed the product around 3 different media types: the hard drives, the caching hard drives, and then the SSDs. On the right-hand side of this, we basically have built into the product the ability to block, file, and object all equally as well. It's not a compromise to run block over file. Again, the business model was designed, and then we built this into the abstract of the hardware itself. So we now have the ability to run CIFS and NFS, Active Directory, Fiber Channel, whatever you wish, we can run that. And then the last piece of this puzzle, again, to line up with the Z Compute, is to put it in a colo, in a data center, or in the cloud. So this is a typical environment that you might see. Maybe we have a VPSA, a virtual private storage array. That's what we named it. We have a file, maybe going to a file share for marketing. We got a file share going for sales. We got objects, maybe for backup. We've got block that is going to run my Oracle and my SQL database. I've now consolidated all these silos into one hardware architecture, which I'm going to call multi-tenant architecture, but single tenant experience. So you're going to basically see that in just a moment. Okay, perfect. So I'm now going to solve some more threats, some more hidden threats. So if I talk about my automatic antivirus based on McAfee inside the storage array, so instead of having to run agents running on the clients or the servers, I now have the ability to run McAfee right inside the storage array itself. That's pretty cool. I also have the ability to reduce RPO and RTO. If somebody makes a mistake, if somebody does something, I can now roll back to a snapshot of a period past, and I can basically resurrect and bring that back up again. So I'm going to help with the human error there. And then on threat number 5 that Blake talked about, encrypted backup, I basically have the ability to do at-rest and in-flight data encryption right at the storage level to be able to help you with that. So it's going to make it a whole lot more difficult for ransomware and things like that to get stuck. But where ransomware really takes effect is basically at the object storage level. And this is where, when I go through the 32110, I now have the ability to create what we call an immutable object lock in compliance mode. It's the ability to have an object in a compliance mode. Basically, think of it as a worm drive or a write once, read many. I cannot rewrite this, and now I work in harmony with some backup software to be able to do this. So now I've solved threat number 5 in an even higher level. It's really nice to have the infrastructure be able to sort of help you with some of the threats. Usually software, you think about it, software and human behavior is established to support or help you to mitigate some of these threats. In this case, we're going to use the hardware. So let's go ahead and create a VPSA in an object. Well, this is no surprise to you. We're going to now go to the user interface, and we're going to basically click on Arco site number 1, and we're going to basically create a storage array, a VPSA. Now, what you can understand by this is we're selecting the size of the disks and the size of the engine, and if you'd like a full demo, we'd be happy to do that for you, but in a very short period of time, we can't do all that for you today. And then you can also create this object storage. Now, I'm going to make this come alive in the next slide, but basically suffice to say, I'm creating a quantity of storage for file or block for databases or file shares, and I'm creating a quantity of storage for object storage, and I'm going to basically be tracked on how much I use, scale up, scale down, whatever I want. Now, reminding you of the threats, backdoor, everybody has their own unique passwords. They're forced to change their password every 30 days. All the things that are required, you have to use a new password that's considerably different, all those other things as well. So we're threading this infrastructure through. Now, as soon as I hit the go button, I'm going to spend a few minutes on this slide because this is so important. And I'm going to share a story that I had with Verizon. And Verizon, this really isn't a threat that Blake talked about. It is absolutely a threat about physical abstracts and physical configurations. So let's say, for example, you want to run your maybe your instant message system, like one of the cell services, like I just mentioned. And so you want to run your instant message in here, but you want to do it in sort of a public environment. You want to get rid of your data centers, and you want to sort of move on into this cloud environment. So they come to Amazon or they come to Azure, and they say, do you know where my data is specifically? Do you know what drives my data's on? And the big hyperclouds go, no, I don't. It's across a large pool, right? It's across a large hyperpool. Okay, so I can't use you then. Well, they say, why can't you? I need to know that in this public environment that I have physical drives that are associated to me. So they came to me at a trade show and they said, do I know where my data is? And I said, yes. Our patents, our virtual private storage array patent says you're going to select drives and you're going to select cores up in the storage nodes that basically create your RAID or your storage controllers. You're going to have your own cache, your own logins, your own credentials, your own role base, your own audit tracking. You're going to create everything on your own. And I said, so why do you ask? And they said, if this drive fails, can you physically ship that drive back to me and I can have it physically shredded? And I say, yes. You're the only one that's on this drive. And they say, perfect, I'll do business with you. That conversation was 5.5 years ago. We call this multi-tenant architecture in a single tenant experience. So the experience is that you own everything. There's an air gap between you and everybody else. That's if it's in the public environment or it's in an Arco environment. Let's say that it's in your environment. This could be Department 1, engineering, this could be sales, this could be object storage backup, whatever. In this environment here, the same hardware architecture, I now have 3 different things going on. Somebody up here is using solid state drives, somebody here is doing hard drives with cache, and somebody down here with object storage is using hard drives with immutability. So now in this one environment, I've taken this little icon over here and I've exploded it based on a couple of simple questions that we asked you here. Click, click, click. 90 seconds later, you now have a 100 terabyte volume, a 500 terabyte volume, whatever you wish. I can now do that with complete isolation between anybody else. That's our patent. That's letting you look inside the tent a bit and seeing exactly what's going on with Zadara and our virtual private storage array. Now, where do I put it? Good question. I can take the Z storage and I can put it in a service provider like Arco, or in a co-location run by Arco, or I can put it in your data center. Now, I've also introduced a new concept here called Direct Connect, Express Route, and Partner Interconnect, and I'm going to introduce this thing called even cloud adjacent. So we can do this even with a cloud adjacent, where my storage can be adjacent to the hyperclouds. This is the way Verizon runs. So they want to use the AWS compute. First of all, we didn't have our compute back then 5.5 years ago. So they wanted to run their compute here with AWS, but they wanted to have all these security environments, the isolation, the performance, the ability to pull a drive out and ship it back to them. They wanted that basically running in the co-location facility in Zadara. So we're using Direct Connect to basically connect the storage together. Just think of it as a long storage bus or a long storage cable that does that. And the performance is very, very good to do this. So now I have this environment where I can go, now any of these, I can copy, I can mirror, I can snapshot, I can clone, I can do whatever I wish. So if I have a little bit down here on-prem and I want to basically use some of that and mirror that up to perhaps cloud adjacent, or I want to move it over to Arco, I now have full range of being able to move my data around this cycle. A much different environment across 350 clouds out there today, as I mentioned, a much different environment than having to lock down in a particular site, one of perhaps 15 in the world. Okay, so now hold on to your hat here. If I basically hit one more one more click here, now I can stand right next to Z Storage, Z Compute. How about that? Now I can basically create an environment like AWS or Azure or Google, but I can do it wherever I want. And basically the financial is going to be equal to or better. In most cases, it's much better. And now I have more control and I don't have to worry about a lot of the threats that Blake was talking about earlier. So now I can basically pick and choose where I want it across the country, closer to where the point of need was. I now have the ability to do this wherever I want. And this is where edge computing meets cloud computing meets the threats that Blake was talking about. So let's go through, I got some pretty cool use cases here, and let's talk a little bit about that. So use case number one is just a simple local backup. So now I have compute. I don't want you to change your compute right now unless you want to. I don't want you to change your primary storage, but I may just want to augment your environment, perhaps in your colo or in your data center, by putting out a small rack, maybe a 7U chunk of hardware to be able to be the target for your backup. So now we're going to spin up these VPSAs and we're going to basically do that. So you don't have to change anything over here, but maybe the cost of backup or the cost of storage is driving you a little crazy. So now we can basically put this in, we can isolate between different work groups, and we can do all the things that I just talked about on the previous slides. So that's a very easy use case that you can have a conversation with Blake about after the call. Now, the next piece is really where we start to build this up. I'm going to take this environment just like I have before, but now because inside the VPSAs I have automatic mirroring, now I can get it. Remember what Blake said is if you have a backup locally, a 1 is 0, meaning if I only have one copy, I really don't even have a copy. So in this case, I basically have now got my backup here, and I'm going to mirror it over to an Arco Group VPSA in their MSP. So now I don't even have to do anything. I have my backup software do the mirror here or the backup here, and then I automatically do a time trigger every hour, every 6 hours, every 8 hours, every day. I'm going to move the data over here. So if something happens, I now have the ability to recover here. But I haven't still solved the ransomware yet. Remember, if ransomware gets put here, theoretically, after 12 or 18 or 24 hours, it may be over here as well. So we have to protect ourselves from that. So we're going to keep building this up a little bit further. I'll come right back to that in a moment. Let's go ahead and solve threat number 3, this remote user type of thing. So now I have many, many customers that are basically doing a VPN CIFS or SMB mount because the performance is really good and because it's co-located near the point of need. I now can basically remote mount in using SMB or NFS or whatever, fully supported over here, both in the compute and in the storage. And now I can have these two folks working at their home perhaps, but VPNing in and basically making sure that all this is protected from an infrastructure perspective, just like we talked about. Now, there may be some environments where we might want to do perhaps Z Compute and Z Storage at the local data center like we did over here in this one. So now we have our data center here, and we're doing a little bit of compute and storage. We're doing a cross mount here using a VPN connection perhaps, and now we're basically putting together a whole data center over here. But it's all driving back to the core, which is basically the Arco Group is now your mothership to be able to do this, okay? So the infrastructure is really helping you here. Now, this is the one I want to spend a little bit of time on. I told you in a previous slide how we could do hard drives and solid state drives and hybrid. I also showed you how we can do block and file and object. Okay, so let's basically break this down. Let's use Veeam as an example here. So Veeam has this thing called 32110, if you haven't heard of it. It's called the Veeam zip code, and it's 3 different media types, 3 different copies, 2 different media types, one of which is offsite, one of which is immutable, and then we're going to basically be able to do some testing if we want to. So let's basically really hit threat number 5 on this slide. So I'm going to do a local backup, just like we talked about in slide number 1, the use case number 1. I'm going to do a local, but I want that to be able to recover quickly. So I may throw that against either SSD drives or hard drives with cache. I want the recovery to be quick. So I'm going to call this a performance tier. And that is basically 3 different copies. We have 333, 2 different media types. I'll go through these a little bit, and then 1 and 1 and 0. So we now have our performance tier, we have our capacity tier, and we have our object storage immutability with a record lock. Okay, so now I have the ability to put these 3 tiers together. Remember, this is not child's play. We're trying to protect from, like Blake was talking about, what, a $10 trillion business in the next few years. We're trying to protect ourselves and hold these tidal waters back. So 2 different media types. So here we have our block, and here we have our object. Those are different media types. Also, this one's offsite. So this one's going to be at Arco Group perhaps, and this one's going to be in your data center. This one might be an Arco Group as well. We have this immutability, and then we have the ability to test this if we think that we can actually recover. I saw an interesting story, I think it was the University of Texas, that said, I did a webinar not too long ago, they said that better than 50% of tape backups can never get a customer back to where they were. The tape backup will never recover from any event that you want to, just because either the tapes have gone bad, we've got maybe something going on with the tapes, lots of different reasons, but 50% test. And most people don't test them periodically to see. This sets ourselves up for being able to test very, very quickly. So what I want to do is another polling question for you folks. So let's go ahead and launch this one. Do you currently have an encrypted, immutable copy of all your data for recovery? So I'm going to go ahead and watch this as just a simple yes or no answer here, or question. And I'm watching the questions come in. Yeah, go ahead, Blake.
I was just going to ask, why can't I vote? I know the right answer.
Yeah, no, you can't. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
You're too important. So I'm still seeing some questions come in, or answers come in. And so of course, I see what's going on here on the responses. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, and if everybody's done, all set, all clear, this is amazing. I've got a lot of people on this call. I don't think I've ever seen it this way, but I'm going to go ahead and do this. Look at this. Do you currently have an encrypted immutable copy of all your data for recovery? Now, maybe the keyword is all, but I would say that 100% of the folks listening to this need to do a little bit of perhaps homework here to be able to maybe help out here. So maybe between Blake and myself and Zadara and Arco, we can basically help you folks out quite a bit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hide those results for a moment. And I'm gonna basically just go down a quick summary, and then I'm gonna get to the call to action. So hang with me here for another 3 or 4 minutes. So I've talked about this concept of putting together an infrastructure between clouds and DCs and colos and migrating data. In fact, I had a question that came in a little bit ago, and the question was, Doug, can you do a DR copy between any VPSA to any other VPSA? or from cloud to DCs? And the answer is yes. Any VPSA on the planet can find any other VPSA on the planet, as long as we have the credentials, the login, the IP addressing, the VPN, as long as we have all the security things that are required, I can basically mirror data anywhere I want. Now remember, compute is stateless. Okay, it doesn't matter. I can move a compute anywhere I want, and I can execute and I can run those applications. But data is stated. Basically data is data. So as long as I can move the data around the planet, I now have the context to be able to spin up compute and then execute and work off of that. So I don't worry about the compute so much when I'm migrating things around. I do worry about the data centers and colos and clouds like that. And we've got a tremendous infrastructure that we can do this. Now, let's say you've got a petabyte. Let's go crazy. You've got a petabyte of data, and you say, Doug, I did the calculations, and it's going to take me a month and a half to move a petabyte over my 100 gig pipe or whatever it happens to be. We can then ship on your behalf an infrastructure to your data center. We can soak up all the archival type of data. Maybe it's 3/4 of it, which typically is the case. We can then physically move that to a site of your choosing, whether it be a public or private colo. And then you can basically finish up with the rest of the data that maybe is active data using our mirror. Once we mirror the data from site A to site B, then we can break the mirror and basically conclude that that data has been moved to another facility. I don't worry at all at night about my concept of being able to help you folks move data between clouds and DCs and colos and all those other things. So that's a given. How do we model compute and storage as a service, moving CapEx to OpEx? Everything I just showed you is completely OpEx, everything. I don't have a CapEx bone in my body. I ship things on your behalf, and I don't charge you until you use. I spin up environments all over the planet, 350 clouds, even in the Peruvian mountains or up in Flin Flan, Canada. Who cares where it happens to be? I can stand this up. Needing cloud services closer to the resource. This is where NFS, CIFS, SMB, file sharing makes sense. If I could put my data center maybe 100 miles down the road and only pay 1 millisecond in latency, I might start to move more data off my employees' notebooks, and I might have them do more with a VPN perhaps down the road to be able to keep that data protected so it's not literally inside the four walls of their facility. So moving the data closer to the source is so important when we have this conversation. Utilize Arco Group's co-location for production and DR and backup. You've got a trusted friend here. And needing to keep the IT resources current at a reduced cost. I kind of skipped over this a little bit, but if I ship a whole lot of stuff to your facility, and let's say I ship 14 terabyte nearline SAS drives, and in a year, there's 25 terabyte nearline SAS drives comes out. That's going to happen. And you call up and you say, hey, Doug, I'd like those 25 terabyte nearline SAS drives. It's going to give me more density. It's going to give me perhaps a lower cost. Can you do that? I say, of course. Tell me how many you need. We're going to basically migrate some data around. There's a lot of magic that goes on inside the array. And then we're going to basically allow you to pop in the 25 terabyte drives, pop out the 14 terabyte drives, ship them back to us, and we'll basically we'll take care of all that. And the pricing theoretically will go down because the new drives are more dense than the older drives. So we're going to keep your IT resources current and new, as long as you keep paying your bills and as long as you keep doing you have a business agreement with us. Remember, you stop owning things. You have to really think about the business model when you don't own things and you have companies like Arco and Zadara watching out for you. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Blake, real quick, and then I'll go ahead and pick up the ball.
Outstanding. Thank you, Doug. So I appreciate everybody's time again today. And as Doug has alluded, excuse me, we do have a great takeaway for everyone who was with us for the last hour. So if you will go to the arcogroup.com/contact us, or you can simply go to info@arcogroup.com. Within the next 14 days, easy for you to say, you could reach out to receive a free 30-day proof of concept to test the concepts that Doug just went over. Also like to add, if anyone just has any questions generally, feel free to shoot an email over to info@arcogroup.com. We'll send you back my Calendly link, and you can schedule a few minutes when is convenient for you, and happy to help the community in any way we can. But in the meantime, Doug, if you could explain a little bit more what the free proof of
Sure.
concept for 30 days includes.
Absolutely. In fact, a question came in just before this slide, so it was very apropos.
Mhm.
Somebody asked, how long does it take to install Z Compute or Z Storage from the point of decision? And so the answer I like to give is probably between 30 and 45 days, we can have something installed. Once the hardware arrives and it gets racked and stacked, we basically have the ability to install this in pretty much a morning and be able to build this up. So the proof of concept is simply tell us what you want it to do. We'll basically put in what we call a criteria for acceptance. And the criteria for acceptance says, this is what I wanted to do. These are the metrics I'm going to use to be able to do this. And then we'll go ahead and monitor this. You guys can basically kick the tires, do whatever you wish, put it through its test. We'll ship SSDs, we'll ship hard drives. We'll do it all under a free proof of concept. If you don't like it and it hasn't met the criteria for acceptance, then basically you ship it back, and there's no issues there at all. But you will love it. I do a lot of these proof of concepts on these webinars. Just fortunate that you sat through this webinar today and you're getting this golden ticket, if you will. But basically, I see very few come back because we do qualify. We want to make sure that you're not wasting your time and we're not wasting our time as well. So another question just came in real quick. I got a minute left. It says, how often can I change my drives, Doug, after what you just said? And so whenever the next drive comes out, whenever it makes sense for you to do it, then we can basically do that whenever you declare that you want to do it. Some people just want to stay somewhat static and keep using things as they go. So anyway, with that, I'm going to basically bring up the last slide, the thank you slide, of course. You folks were great. You stuck with me the whole hour. I hope this was insightful. I hope this was interesting. I hope mirroring the 5 threats with hardware and infrastructure was kind of a compelling comment here. So Blake, final word?
Thank you. I think the sums it up very well. Again, appreciate everybody's time. Please feel free to reach out and let us know how we can help.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, morning, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Bye-bye now.